Good morning, everybody, and welcome to whatever me and Brett decide to label this podcast in the future. Today's topic is going to be Lebanon. A big explosion happened roughly a month ago, and I'll pass it on to Brett now to give you a general outline of what it was.
Okay, thank you, Hunter. So, you've probably all seen in the news the video of that tragic explosion in Beirut, the main city of Lebanon, and we're going to be talking about that explosion, but also about Beirut in general, because that explosion really cracked open the surface of a lot of stuff going on in Lebanon that we personally really had no idea about. And so we used that explosion to look at things going on, things related to it, and we've got a lot of stuff for you. Why don't we just dive right into it then?
Yeah, so,
Um, Go
what's
ahead.
something that you found to be intriguing with this? Like any outside stuff besides just the explosion?
Besides just the explosion,
Yeah.
I mean, me being a religious studies student, of course, I focused a lot on, I guess, both the religions of Lebanon. And it was really deeply interesting to me because, of course, the Middle East is a real melting pot of religions. And you say, well, religious all Muslim. But there's so many denominations
Mm-hmm.
of Islam going on there. And you can see that in Lebanon in so many ways. Um, the two most interesting things, or I guess sects that you have in Lebanon, though, are the Maronites and the Druze. And the Druze they're Muslim, but they're not.
What do you
They're
mean?
so they call themselves Unitarian in a way. So they're Muslim, but they don't follow any of the five pillars. They don't do the Hajj to Mecca. They incorporate some things from Greek philosophy, from Gnosticism in there. It's a whole weird esoteric mix, something that you don't usually see in the rest of the Islamic world. But they're off in the mountainous highlands of Lebanon, um, and they are. Let's see, who needs to be the Druze? I believe it's one of the chiefs of staff
Mm-hmm.
in the government that has to be a Druze, which is mandated by the Constitution. And then the other sect I found really interesting was the Maronite Christians, um, and this is a monastic order that was originally based around Mount Lebanon, which is what Lebanon is named for, believe it or not. Um, but the Maronites and the Druze, and the reason I bring them up is because they originally had this agreement that they would sort of share social and political power in the region between themselves, because they were the sort of two most dominant sects in the area before, of course, the Ottomans and the French Mandate period. Um, but that's just a perfect example of how diverse the religions are, and how diverse that makes the people, but also shows the deep sectarian lines that run through the country.
Oh yeah, and
What
speaking,
is
I
Yeah,
love to
go
talk
ahead.
about that.
Yeah.
So I was looking into
Mm,
it. Like a lot of like what's happening in Lebanon right now. Like there's huge protests happening. Like that was happening
mm-hmm.
before the explosion, happening post like explosion, and a lot of it's because they have like deep-seated mistrust in the government. Because like, it seems there's a lot of like corruption and just like problems with the sectarian government that they have. And like
Yeah.
that to me is like super, especially with the fact that was like a week after the initial explosion, everybody in government just said they're going to step down, just like done, just gave
That
up.
was an interesting response to me.
Yeah, and then like from what I was reading, a lot of people were like I guess initially cool with it, and then it came out that none of like the initial problems of like how they got there were ever addressed, right? So it's like all these protests that they've done are completely in vain because they're still going to elect their governors and like, officials in this sectarian way that people are upset with because it leads to
Mhm.
such corruption. Now, do you think that's like something that has to do with like the religious part in and of itself, or do you think it's more like a governmental flaw?
Well, personally, I think it's probably down more to a governmental flaw. Now, because everyone is always going to have their team that they're on, and when you're in such a divided country like that, whether you want to be or not,
Mm-hmm.
and of course, everyone's not going to like the other team, and we see this in America clearly, but over there, it's got to be a whole lot more intense. So I think there's always going to be that sort of uh, ethnic distaste,
Mm-hmm.
in some way. for people in those positions, or people that have to be a certain denomination or a certain ethnic group holding a certain position. I think what's more important, and what struck me to be more important to the people that were conducting these protests and coming out, is more the economic situation, and the real, more pragmatic situation going on in the country.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, the economy, the insurrection, Hezbollah's influence, Israel's influence, Syria's influence, and especially, as you mentioned, the corruption too, because they just really can't seem to find. I mean, this is just, it seems to be a problem everywhere, honestly.
Oh yeah.
You know,
And like on the
I
economic
used to
topic.
think corruption. Oh, yeah, go
Oh no,
ahead.
go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
I used to think corruption was just, little dumb me back in the day. It's like, oh well, only third world nations deal with corruption, but
If only.
that's
If only.
if only.
But no, like
But
onto
go
the
on.
economic crisis, because I'm sure not a whole lot of people know about this, myself included, because I
Hmm.
knew nothing about it up until last night.
Of course.
But like I was looking at it, and their currency, what is the lira, lost
Yeah.
80% of its value over the last
Ooh.
9 months, and 60% of that 80 happened in a singular month right before the explosion.
And that's before the
Yeah,
explosion.
insane to me, because like I was looking into it, and a lot of what happened was like the central government of like the
Hmm.
central bank was taking out a bunch of loans from private banks to help pay off import fees to keep imports like
Oh,
cheap, and the private banks
okay.
were taking money from the citizenry, and whenever it came time to like actually settle out on debts, there was no money anywhere. Nobody had anything to pay.
Oh,
So basically, the
I see.
entire country got Ponzi schemed, and now like people who were initially middle
Ugh.
class literally cannot even afford a loaf of bread to be able to give their kids for food.
Hmm.
Like it is, like, looking at it, it's just so devastatingly sad. Like there's just nothing there anymore.
Yeah, and then to think of, I mean, there's already what 1.5 million or Syrian refugees in the country, and that's just the Syrian refugees. I mean, who knows how many of other nations or ethnicities are in there? Um, so the situation's made even worse by that, because now you have even more people that you can't feed. And I saw this really interesting article on Al Jazeera, which I love for Middle Eastern news. Some people say they're biased, but uh, of course they are.
Every what
You're Al
media source
Jazeera,
isn't biased?
yeah. But if you ever want good stuff in the Middle East, there's a whole lot of it that comes out of Al Jazeera, detailed stuff.
Oh yeah.
Um, let's see, where was this? Yeah, this was from the UN too. More than half of Lebanon could face food shortages
Oh yeah. By the end of the year, yeah, I found that
by
too.
the end of the year. Yeah,
Like that, and it
and I mean
also. Oh,
that's
go ahead.
insane. Yeah, because Lebanon really wasn't well, it's not that. It wasn't that bad of a country back 50 years ago.
Oh no.
It was called the Switzerland of the Middle East, and then it so quickly just
Devolved.
plummeted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, and also like with the food shortage stuff, like I don't. They're already having an issue with it before the explosion. Then after the massive explosion at their import dock,
Hmm.
they lost so much food storage that like it just
Yeah.
compounded like the starving people they already had, like the situation they're already in. That and what
Yeah.
I think they said a few days ago, they found another 4.5 tons of ammonium nitrate just
I
right there
saw
at
that
the same
too.
pier. And like
Believe it or not.
it's like what I totally understand why the people are wanting to protest their government, because obviously there's some deep-seated ineptitude where they had a huge explosion which killed hundreds of people, injured thousands a month ago,
Hmm.
and have done literally nothing to change it or do anything about it. Like I think they
Yeah.
said
I
the
mean,
most
it's
they've done,
shocking.
like the most they've done is maybe 12 arrests of like officials, and that's it. That's just sad.
Yeah, I mean, they won't really properly be, tried and
Oh
accounted
no.
for.
They're
Of
probably going
course,
to
of
some like
course.
really cushy, like nice, like political prison, and that's it. Like it's
Yeah,
just basically
yeah,
a
who
house
knows?
arrest and nothing else.
Sit for a few years, get out, whatever. But yeah, I mean, that's why people are protesting. It's kind of crazy seeing, I guess, basically the same thing sort of play out in like Beirut and Lebanese cities that is playing out in America with the police protest
Oh my god, yeah.
interactions.
That and like with the
Um,
like the police brutality towards the protesters. I was reading up on some stuff where they were like shooting
mhm.
metal pellets out of shotguns into protesters, just
Yeah, you know.
peppering them up. Like, oh, it's just insane that the police force thinks it's okay. And like they've said on multiple
Oh yeah.
accounts where they're just like, no, we're not doing it. And then like you see all these pictures come out the day after of just people up and down covered in red sores and just marks from them getting blasted
Strikes
into
me as
shit.
so familiar. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't tell the pictures apart if you put them next to each other,
Oh no.
with no captions,
I mean, you
unless you
compare
really
that
paid
to like,
attention, obviously.
yeah, you compare that to like what's happening in like protests in Hong Kong, or you compare it to like the
Yeah,
protests that's happening here in the United States. Like, you can't tell a difference. Fascism and oppression is the same everywhere. It's just colored by a different flag.
yeah. And I think that's the real problem, you know, just not like who makes up the government necessarily, but just what they're doing,
Oh yeah, I
you know.
I'm not sure if it's like just big governments now in general, but it seems like almost every nation is having some kind of huge just governmental issue just trying to oppress their people. And if it's so
Yeah,
widespread, it's hard to believe that it's just like each country's having their own problem for it, or if is it like just government as a whole. We haven't touched it in the last like 200 years. Like the ideology of what a government is hasn't been affected with modern times. So,
yeah.
like, do you think that might
Well, I
be the
mean,
cause of it?
I think there's still good examples of good government
Mhm.
existing in the world. Um, you know, of course we don't always know as much as we'd like to think we
Yeah.
know about these places, but the one that always strikes me, New Zealand, you know,
Ugh,
New
the
Zealand never
Kiwis.
ceases to impress me. I mean, yeah, part of it is just like, oh, it's New Zealand again. But, but I mean, truly, like their leader and the way their country actually like sticks together. I
Mhm.
don't know, identifies with each other, has a sense of community, cares about each other.
I mean, like,
Isn't fiercely individualistic.
oh yeah, like look at how they dealt with like the COVID situation, right? They have 0 cases in the country now. Like they dealt
Mm.
with it. Like they finished it. No
Yeah,
cure. They're just like, hey, please like do the social distancing, wear your mask, like quarantine yourself if you have any like symptoms or anything.
yeah.
Everybody just kind of
No
did it.
no problems with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like they're having full soccer games now with people just attending, no issue, because there's literally no fear of it because it doesn't exist anymore.
yeah. I mean, they're even having parties in Wuhan right now. Have you seen that?
No, I have not.
There was it was on the news because everyone's like, oh my god, it's Wuhan. Um, they're partying in Wuhan. I can't believe it. That means it's over. But there was like this big rave in
Mhm.
Wuhan, but it was like in a pool, like this massive pool filled with thousands of people
Oh my
just
god.
raving in Wuhan. And everyone saw that and were like, what?
Yeah, like why? I don't understand. What?
I mean,
I'm
in their
assuming there's like a
case, like
huge
I
spike in
guess
cases.
they must have figured it out, you know.
Wait, like
Unless the
nobody got
Chinese
infected?
government really just doesn't give a fuck anymore.
Honestly, I don't think
But
the Chinese
honestly, I
government
think
really
they
cares
do.
about their
So
people.
I think they give a fuck about that.
I
But
mean, yeah, but did we see like obviously like the information we're getting out of China is kind of like scarce and whatnot, but was there like any kind of like surge in cases after that, or is it just like no problem, nobody got sick, it was just whatever?
nothing that I've seen from it. I
Uh,
mean, but the reporting between authorities in China is
yeah.
not great because everyone bumps up the numbers or bumps them down, depending.
I mean, it's a similar thing
Nothing's
as like
real.
how North Korea mystically didn't have a case until like last month or something, at all. Just like,
Yeah.
come on, don't lie to us like that. We know you have coronavirus
What you
there.
talking about? Yeah.